let's start. So today it's like a historical review on ruby. And we only have like 35 to 40 minutes, so I will try to keep it very simple, not very technical, okay? But this is just to give you an idea of some things that have to do with the use of ruby throughout history. And we will cover today what is a ruby. Maybe many of you know what's a ruby, but some of you might not have think what actually a ruby is. We also discussed ruby as a trade name, what is behind the use of ruby as a trade name. And of course, we will discuss the early sources of ruby, mostly in Asia, and also the modern sources of ruby in today's world, focusing particularly in Africa. We know today that Mozambique is the largest ruby producer in the world. So things changed from Asia to Africa quite recently, 10 years ago. So quite interesting. And because we will mention a lot of sources, geographical sources, and that some geographical sources have a common geology. We will not discuss origin determination, but we will say that today, and maybe because of history, because of history, people, they care about where things come from. That's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is history. And laboratories, they have to sort it out. And one of the ways of solving the problem is to having reference collections of gemstones of known places, and reference collections are collected by field gemmologists like Vincent that will join us next Friday. What we will not cover, because we won't have time, is history of the synthetics, which is quite important. For instance, rubies in watches, since the early 20th century, they are made of synthetic ruby, okay? And so we will not discuss synthetic rubies. We will not discuss the history of treatments, which is quite important as well for the market, and also the gemmology and science behind the detection of treatments and synthetics, and also origin determination. That's not for today. What we'll not discuss also today is Portuguese cuisine. Stupid joke. Those you know me know that I can help those things. So what is a ruby? Ruby is a variety of a mineral that is called corundum. And if you think and hear corundum in all your languages, in Portuguese it's corindo, in English is corundum, and you have many other accents and many other names, it's really an ugly name. It is. I mean, for a mineralogist, it's like, oh, corundum. But as a product, corundum, look, corundum, doesn't sound good. But that's the name of the mineral, okay? And ruby is just the red variety of this mineral. And this mineral has a very simple formula, aluminium and oxygen, but this is not important right now. What is important is most corundum on the planet looks like this. Not the ruler, but the mineral. Because, I mean, they look like rocks, ordinary rocks. They are not pleasant to the eye. Some might find this pleasant, but the general people won't find it pleasure because it doesn't have any color and doesn't have transparency. So doesn't have those beauty things that we expect on a gemstone. But most corundum in nature is like this. Only very rarely does corundum occur in color and transparency that we call it a gemstone. And this is the example. This is an excellent ruby specimen, and you can see there really saturated color and some transparency. And this is a ruby. Calling this a corundum is correct technically, but for us that we are in the jewelry industry, we are not academics, we can call this a ruby, okay? The academic will call this a corundum, but we call it a ruby. Interestingly, this chap over here, it's also a corundum, but on blue corundum, we call it sapphire. Yellow corundum, we call it yellow sapphire. Orange corundum, orange sapphire, and so forth. So corundum, when it occurs in any other color rather than ruby, we call it sapphire. That's it. So sapphire and ruby are the same mineral, they just differ in color. One interesting thing, we don't call red sapphire to ruby because we don't, because it could be intellectually correct, okay? But we don't. We call it only ruby, and to the other sapphires, blue sapphire, and there is another expression, fancy sapphire, which are sapphires that are not blue. They are all corundum. So on this magnificent picture by Mia Dixon, she's an artist on photographing pictures, that one with the leaves is absolutely fantastic. These colors, it's all the same material. Everything is the same. The only difference between, not the only difference, but the main difference between red corundum, ruby, and the others is color. And color is determined in minerals usually by, there are several mechanisms, but the most important here is the presence of one chemical impurity, which is chromium, that substitutes the aluminium that you see on the formula. And the more chromium you have, the more red the stone becomes. This is one of the color mechanisms that we have in minerals, and in corundum it is quite popular to have chromium in the aluminium position, so it makes the mineral change the color to other than colorless, because when corundum is pure, it has it has whatsoever no color, like the glass on your watches. Synthetic sapphire, which is synthetic corundum, has no color because it's chemically pure, and not ruby. Ruby is not chemically pure, has chromium. And the more chromium you have, the more red it becomes. And so you can have this gradation from the pink, less chromium, to the deep or saturated red, more chromium. But then you can ask me, where do I draw a line between ruby and pink sapphire? Now you tell me. And we also know that depending on the kind of light that we use to illuminate the sample, the way we see the red is different. So there is a lot of variables to understand color. But let's not complicate things. Only very simply, you look at this picture, where is ruby, where is pink sapphire? There is no international standard. There is not. Each laboratory, each organization has its own standards. And SSCF, which is the one that holds the right of this picture, has one standard, and the standard was made many years ago by the ICA, International Color Gemstone Association. I have no idea what those stones are, but SSCF has a standard, GIT Thailand has standards, AIGS, also Thailand, has standards, Gublin Lab has standards, GIA, they have standards. There must be a color standard so you can make a decision. You have you have to say what kind of lighting you are using and what kind of orientation of the stone, and it's a confusion to do it, but you need a standard, but there is no international standard. It's not serious for stones that are really pink and those that are really red, but on borderline cases, it's hard, because many of you don't know red and pink are the same. The only difference between red and pink is tone and saturation, because it's the same color. When you see the color wheel, I don't know if you remember the color wheel when we were studying color in high school. We have the primary colors, and then we have the secondary colors. And then color has to do with hue, which is the color itself, and then tone, which is the amount of black that you can have on a color, and saturation, the amount of color, of vividness, of the value that you have there. And so if you have a pink with more tone, with more black and more saturation, you have a red. So pink and red is the same thing, and have that in mind. So something like this on this Cartier ring, would you call it a ruby or a pink sapphire? I make it easy. It's a pink sapphire on a Cartier website. And something like this is easy. This is quite red. boom, look at this bright red of this corundum, ugly name, but I mean, the trade name is ruby, and this is fantastic. And ruby has a particular thing, I'm not going to explain it right now, at not only it is red, but also glows red because of one property that many rubies have, not all, but many rubies have, which is fluorescence. So it's red over red. The guys from Benfica, which is a Portuguese team, they love. Maybe the Man United, they also love. Liverpool, all the red teams like ruby. I'm more an emerald guy. So because ruby has been used for ages for red stones, it has been used as a trade name throughout the ages for many materials. For those of you that watch the Emerald webinar, I also showed a chart like this showing misnomers or old trade names for emerald. And here I do the same for ruby. We have a lot of materials that only because they were red, they were called rubies. But there are a few that are more important than others. This guy, Marbodius of Rennes, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, in the medieval ages, he mentioned three kinds of rubies. The Bohemian ruby, and Bohemia is from the Czech Republic, from the Bohemian region, which is garnet, and it's still very popular in Turnov, the manufacture of jewelry using, today maybe not local garnets, but it used to be local garnets many, many years ago. This so-called Oriental Ruby, those were the real rubies, okay, coming from Asia. And there was a third one that was the Balas Ruby. And Balas Ruby were really popular many, many years ago. When I say many, I say centuries. And there are many spellings and many names for the Balas Ruby. You can call it Ballet, Balais, Balas, many, many names. And they look like this. And they were called rubies. But when we look carefully, we know that those chaps, they are not rubies, although they were called rubies. They are actually spinels. And spinel is a totally different mineral than ruby. It's like having a turkey for Christmas and having fish for Christmas. Different things, nothing to do. One thing is spinel, one composition, some properties. The other thing is ruby, corundum, another mineral, different properties, different everything. Here, what they might have in common is probably some kind of color, okay? But it was called ruby. When we go back in history, we understand that those rubies, those Balas rubies, they came from this area in today's Tajikistan, and this area was called Badakhshan, in Portuguese Badakistan or Balashia, also we call it here, and hence the name Balas, because it has to do with the old name of the region. And on this region, and we see here Vincent lying on Tajikistan, you have Afghanistan on the other side of the river, because it's all, particularly on this area, on the Pamir Mountains, that those sometimes huge spinels came historically from. So this is quite interesting to know that in antiquity, the big rubies, they were not rubies, they were spinels, and they came from today's Tajikistan, from Badakhshan. And this is interesting to know because it was spinel that gave a big name to ruby, if we think about it. And by the way, Vincent, he's joining us in the next webinar. So Friday, we will see this chap telling you all the stories, maybe about this trip to Tajikistan to go to the Kuhilal mines to retrieve some local spinel. So back to our talk. Many famous rubies that we see on museums, like this one on the Imperial State Crown in the Tower of London. This, let me just put my mouse with the spotlight. Okay. This big ruby is not a ruby, it's a spinel, a huge spinel. And we look at this, just a curiosity. Do you see this line here? looks like a line, that's a drill hole, because gemstones used to be polished and drilled so they could be set not with claws or with a metal as we use today, but they were drilled and they were hanged with wire work. And so this was a very old spinel. And there is a colleague, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you this, the name of the colleague, but he will be researching and publishing on the Black Prince Ruby quite in a few weeks probably. So we will hear a new story about this chap in a couple of weeks. Interestingly, as I was going to say, not a ruby, a spinel, has a drill, and on a drill hole they put a nice gold case with a nice ruby, real ruby cabochon. So really nice crown, really nice spinel, not a ruby. Another ruby, famous one, the Timur Ruby, also on the crown jewels of Great Britain. So another one that holds the name ruby, but it's not a ruby, spinel from Tajikistan. Another one in the Imperial crown of Russia, huge spinel on top. Even the replica that was made a couple of years ago to celebrate the Russian diamonds, they didn't find a spinel as big as that one. They had to find another, I don't want to say substitute, but the look-alike, which is tourmaline. And so on the replica of the Imperial crown, there is a huge pink tourmaline, which is named rubellite, if you wish to call it rubellite. And many others. I mean, I don't want to bore you with so many rubies that are not rubies. In the Al-Thani collection, and eventually also in the Mughal and Maharaja and Mughal Magnificence auction that took place not that long ago, all of those red things, the big ones, are not rubies, they are spinels. And even, and this is quite interesting, this is the Hope spinel, and this belonged to a banker named Hope that also gave the name to the Hope diamond that you saw Luis Gayu talking about in the last webinar, the famous blue diamond at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And if we look carefully to the label of this spinel, we see that it's not Balas, but it said Spinel Ruby. The word ruby was attached to this kind of stone. And sometimes when we say that spinels are substitutes of ruby, they were actually rubies. They were called rubies. And this is quite strange to understand, but this is fact. So, and this is important for you to understand that spinel was actually called a ruby. And that this is one of the most important takeaways of today. Today, for jewelry, not only we have spinels from Tajikistan, they can still be around, but mostly from Tanzania and also from Myanmar, the bright red ones. It's a really great gemstone to look after. And if we have heard before that, oh, spinel, it's a weak, it's not a nice stone, this is really expensive. Try and buy a 3 to 5 carat vivid red spinel. It's not cheap, it's quite expensive, and the price went up quite dramatically in the last 2 decades. So why the hell am I speaking about spinel on a ruby talk? And this is, and I wish to spend some time with spinel because historically they share the same name, and this is important. Ruby was the Oriental Ruby and also the Balas Ruby. Most of the famous rubies that gave fame to ruby are actually spinels. And the word corundum and ruby as a variety of corundum is something that was only decided or defined by science in the late 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. So it's quite new to understand that ruby is the red variety of corundum, is not an old thing, is a very recent thing that was born when mineralogy became to be developed in the late 18th century, early 19th century. So let's go now talk a little bit more, not more, a little bit about early sources. I mentioned the name Oriental Ruby because rubies from the Western European perspective, they came from the Orient. And very old ruby sources have been reported in Sri Lanka, which is Ceylon, and also in Afghanistan, in Jagdalek. But we will skip those not as big and important sources, and we will focus on the historically most important source for ruby, that is actually Myanmar, that was previously known as Burma, and before that it was the Kingdom of Pegu. And in the Mogok area, Mogok is not one mine, Mogok is like a mining province, a really huge, it stands for kilometers. You have a lot of mines, a lot of sources. It's like this land was blessed by gemstones. You have many gemstones, from rubies, from sapphires, ambligonites, tourmaline, even diamonds. I don't know the geology of local diamonds, but in alluvial deposits, you can find diamonds there. So it's crazy. They find everything in there. Almost every gemstone occurs in Mogok, in the Mogok area. And the best rubies ever traditionally started to come from Pegu, or from Burma, if you wish. Of course, the English, when they took over the land, they tried to take as many rubies as they could. And also mineral collectors. We don't think that every ruby that is caught goes to a lapidary machine to make cut gemstones. Sometimes specimens like this one, and this looks like a sculpture, but is actually a crystal, a naturally formed crystal. And there are mineral collectors that love these crystals and love to have things like that. You cannot see from my drawings, but I've got some minerals in there. I mean, not this kind of minerals, but I collect minerals as well as any gem mineral geek. We have to have rocks. Very hard to clean the dust, but anyway. And this is very important now. Mogok rubies, and rubies in general, for all that matter, usually are small. Small meaning under 1 carat. I mean, they are really small stones, as you can see here on this collection of jewelry, antique jewelry from the Albion Art Institute in Tokyo. We see that the rubies are quite small. By the way, this is a nice Portuguese Christ cross, but it's not in Portugal, it's in Japan. And those are the crown jewels of Portugal, or part of the crown jewels of Portugal. And we see large diamonds and rubies. They are small, really tiny, okay? Because the rubies, the majority of them, they are really small. It's really rare to encounter a large ruby. And when large rubies are available, they become special stones. Sapphire, for instance, is like the brother, the blue brother of ruby. Occurs, it's not that hard to find a 10 carat sapphire, but it's a challenge to find a 10 carat nice ruby. It's really, really rare. And this ring that you saw previously, this ring is also in Japan in the Albion Art Collection, but before it was on sale in Sotheby's. And for you to see the size of such a ruby, it's absolutely amazing. And when you have a ruby of that size, I think this is 8 point something or 9 carats, it's like, it's huge. It's absolutely enormous. And we should appreciate, and whenever we are allowed to walk in jewelry stores, and when you pass by a jewelry store and see a ring with a 10 carat ruby, maybe you don't see them on the street window, but you go in and ask to see one, and you see the price, and it's crazy. Rubies are really rare, and the rare above 2 carats, not that much. Above 7 to 8 millimeters in size, if you don't know what carats are. So it's really rare. To demonstrate how rare they can be, let's look into some historical jewelry. This is an Iberian Portuguese thing. It's on a Portuguese museum in Coimbra. And all of the stones here, I mean, we have emeralds, okay? We have enamel, and we have rubies, except, and this is an agate, except one. This one is a Spinel. I have no idea why the Spinel was chosen. Maybe because they wanted a Spinel, a Balas ruby, or maybe because this is larger than the others and they could not afford the larger one, red stone. So they bought a Spinel that traditionally was half the price of a ruby on the old days. Same here. This is a 1758 jewelry piece from the Archdiocese of Évora in Portugal. You see a lot of rubies, okay, some really nice cut diamonds, old cuts, 2 garnets, okay, but that's not important. But look at the big stone. Big stone is supposed to be a ruby, right? But it's not. It's a foil-backed pink topaz, because getting a hold of such a large ruby was crazy, was obscene. The price would be obscene. To get a hold of all those rubies was already a challenge, let alone a big, large stone that would, like, I don't know, would weigh like 12 to 15 carats on this jewelry piece. It's quite challenging. So it's a Brazilian pink topaz with a red foil back that you see back there. A 17th century, again, Portuguese jewelry, my patriotism coming up so I can show you some Portuguese stuff. A nice rose-cut sapphire, possibly from Sri Lanka, some rose-cut diamonds set in gold, colorful enamel, and look at the rubies. They are quite large. They must be like 2.5 carats each, approximately. And when we look at the outline, you don't see one that is square. Everyone is like, no one has a squarish, regular, symmetrical shape. And most of you now are thinking correctly. Rubies were so expensive and they were so rare in large sizes. Then when you had a large stone to cut, you didn't care about the symmetry and perfection of the cut. You would need a large stone. So you have like cut corners almost in every ruby because of the shape of the crystal. And so normally they are flat. And this is it. This is how big rubies were cut when the cutter wished to retain weight as much as he could, because rubies were rare in big sizes, and because gemstones, as most of you know, are sold by the carat, meaning by the weight. The more weight you have in the stone, the more the price per unit of weight, the more the price per carat. And so this is a demonstration of it. It is not irregular because they didn't know how to cut. Look at the sapphire. The sapphire is quite oval, quite nice. So they did knew how to cut correctly if they wished, but they didn't. They just wanted something big. Oh, my voice, sorry. And this is the example. Now, this is a quite large piece of jewelry made in gilded silver. And I hope that the picture moves in your screen smoothly. So you can see, when you see the emeralds, all the emeralds are rectangular or square, quite homogeneous. The same pretty much with diamonds, rose-cut diamonds, and some table cuts. But for rubies, everything is like twisted. They didn't care about having them perfect. Perfect was having them, full stop. Having rubies was really expensive. Sometimes you have like special specimens like the famous Hixon ruby that you can visit when you can in Los Angeles County Natural History Museum. It's a quite lovely, it's a marvelous crystal. It's crazy, 190 carats. It's crazy for a ruby. It's for a quartz, but for a ruby, it's out of this world. Of course, the big brands, the big designers and the maisons, which is more chic to say maisons, the jewelry houses around the world, they recognized in Burmese rubies this kind of quality, this kind of red, this kind of sizes, not only in big sizes like you see here on a Boucheron and a Harry Winston rig, but also in small sizes like the very famous invisible setting made by Van Cleef. So Burmese rubies were becoming really famous because up until the 60s, up until the time where military turbulence happened in Myanmar, in Burma, the major source for gem quality transparent rubies was Myanmar. was Burma. Things like this, you must know this was made by Cartier to the Maharaja of Patiala. It was sold quite recently on a Christie's auction. This is part of a huge lavish necklace. This is just the choker. It's crazy. Examples of fabulous Burmese rubies. It's not easy to make a selection, but this is a huge 32 carat show me ring, and look at the price, $200,000 a carat in auction, 6 million, almost $7 million. Smaller one, okay, 6 carats, but look at the price, $500,000 a carat, 3 million the stone. It's amazing. This is to demonstrate that rubies, when they are transparent with high clarity, that usually they are not. They are pretty much like emeralds. Usually they have little things inside that we call inclusions. And when you have a clear one, and with good saturation, and if it is red over red, oh, it's crazy. Another example. This is quite famous. This was originally on a Bulgari ring. It was bought by Graf, and since then it became known as the Graf ruby. He paid almost $4 million for the ring, and he set it on this one. And then the gentleman, I think he was Greek, put it up again for auction, the Graf ruby on a Graf ring, and this was the price, almost $100 million a carat for an 8-carat stone, and $8.5 million for the same stone that 8 years before costed not 4 million. And do you know who bought it? Graf. So Graf bought it in 2006 for almost 4 million, sold it to his customer. And then his customer put it up for sale, and Graf bought it again for double. It's crazy. And for you to understand what the size, what is an 8-carat stone on a ring, this is the kind of size we are talking about. And this is 8.5 million at auction. I have no idea if Graf sold it. He must have sold it already. I have no idea for how much, but you can imagine. So, but rubies like this are so rare that this is a one-of-a-kind thing. And for those of you that are gemologists, this looks like a flame fusing synthetic ruby. I mean, it's so perfect. It's amazing. And the most expensive ruby ever, the Sunrise Ruby on a Cartier ring. I think I know who bought this. And the price per carat is $1.2 million. And maybe if you are used to looking at auctions, this is the kind of per carat price that you see on fancy colored diamonds, not even colorless diamonds. You don't see $1 million a carat thing, but you saw 30 million, one ring, go figure. That's how rare they are. By the way, look at the inclusions. This is not a crystal clear ruby, but it's really big. It's really big, 25 carats, it's big. And the color, it's fantastic. I'm not going to talk about pigeon blood, but that's another topic we'll not be covering today. That's a color descriptor, quite controversial if we want to discuss it. So the word Burmese ruby became like, whoa, Burmese ruby became the epitome or synonymous of high quality. But then in 1992, in the 90s, a new source in Myanmar, hence in Burma, was discovered. And those rubies, they were rubies, but they were not like the best quality. They needed some treatment, some cosmetics. Like treatments are things that I made to stones to change their color or to modify their colors or their transparency or their stability. So those chaps, they needed something to be able to be saleable, because for example, they were born with this kind of bluish cores that made the stones look more purplish than red. And by the way, just out of curiosity, this is a really nice crystal from Mong Hsu, taken by a fantastic photographer, Wimon. And this is the picture for her daughter, Billy Hughes. And by the way, the next picture, you see the picture of the father. So the whole family is in 2 slides. And this is the kind of color that you see on Mong Hsu material in the rough, on some of the material, that after treatment becomes nice. So Mong Hsu material, it's Burmese, they produced quite a lot for years, and they needed treatment. And since the 90s, for those of you that study jewelry or the history of jewelry, we see one drop in production in ruby jewelry in the 60s because of the Burmese political situation. The Siam or Thai Cambodian rubies took over for a few decades. But then when the Mong Hsu rubies came about and the opening of the Burmese trades to the exterior, then we see a rise of the ruby production of ruby jewelry production again. And this is because of Mong Hsu. They started to produce huge quantities, but treatments like heat treatments, flux healing, cavity or fracture filling. I'm not going to explain each and every one of these techniques, but those are techniques to modify the color and the transparency, and if you wish, the stability of this material. And because of this, the word Burmese ruby became kind of compromised because it didn't mean that exclusive historical Mogok quality, right? That's why today you don't see Burmese rubies, for instance, in auction houses catalogs. You see classical or classic Burma or classic Burmese. You see some expression that uses the word classic or classical, I don't know the correct way of saying it in English, to precisely to point out that those rubies, they are from the historical Mogok source, not from the newer 90s source from Mong Hsu, where Burmese rubies, because they come from Burma, Myanmar, needed treatment or heavy treatment to become different, to become usable. So this is quite interesting because when you say, oh, this is the Burmese rubies, some of you, oh, Burmese. But that magic of the word Burmese that came from history was kind of compromised in the 90s because of the Mong Hsu ruby. That is a terrific material, not as expensive and not as desirable to the market as this one. And when I say desirable, I mean the consumers, they are sovereign. They can be manipulated by marketing, and we know everything about that, but that's how things are. But what they demand is what the market delivers. And if they want Burmese as a synonym of good quality, you should use classical Burma or classic Burma. That's what you see on reports, actually. I just told you, let me check the time. So we have, I will rush for more 5 minutes so we can have time for questions and answers. I mentioned that in the 60s, because of political issues, the already known rubies from the Thai and Cambodian border, they started to be, I was about to say harvested, but they started to be more prevalent in the market. They had one characteristic, which was because they have, you remember when I said that rubies have chromium that make them red? Well, these chaps, they have another ingredient, which is iron, that quenches the reddish character of the corundum, making those rubies not as bright and vivid red as the Burmese traditional ones. And this is the kind of color, maybe the color is not, the picture doesn't represent this color, but they look different, okay? They look a bit more orangey, maybe. This is another nice picture from women now in Lotus Gemmology that represents the typical top color of a Thai ruby that's totally different than the color of a Burmese or the other kind of sources, or like Vietnamese, for instance, rubies. This has to do with the iron. This has to do with fluorescence or the lack of fluorescence, but that's very technical. I'm not going to dive into that. Another important historical source from the second half of the 20th century is the rubies from Africa. And for ages, when I got into this industry in the late 80s, I had a job in a jewelry shop, so I could pay my studies in London, and I was not selling jewelry. I was on the back office. And I remember the owner of this really fine jewelry shop in Lisbon. she was saying that African rubies, they are all cabochon quality. So if she wanted the not as expensive rubies, it was Siam. Really expensive ones would be the Burmese. And then for cabochons, she would source African rubies. And she was meaning at that time the rubies from Kenya, particularly from the John Soul mine that was discovered back in the 70s. And John Soul mine, and by the way, it was John Soul himself that provided those pictures. So thank you, John. I don't know if you are online, but Eric, I know you are. So merci bien, merci bien. Yeah, they speak French. And the cabochon and like qualities of the typical John Soul material was used in many jewelry collections, like this Trésor d'Afrique by Chaumet. So you see the cabochons, you see the kind of color, and this would be the typical cabochon quality that you can have in African or Kenyan rubies. Kenyan rubies can also occur in transparent facetable qualities, but the majority is cabochon. Of course, other sources like Burma, for instance, also produce cabochon quality. So one thing doesn't mean that Africa is all cabochon and Myanmar is all facetable quality. It changes. I don't know, in other African countries, you've got Tanzania, and in Tanzania, we have a lot of places. And I will highlight two in particular. One is this one, Longido or Longido, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a place where you have a rock that is composed of ruby, of epidote, which is another green mineral, and some black minerals. And that rock is locally named as annualite, and it looks like this. I mean, this looks like candy. And the fantastic gemstone carvers in Ida Oberstein, they know how to carve that material, taking advantage of the two colors of that rock. And this is ruby, but the material is a rock. The ruby is it's only the red part. And Windsor produced rubies for a very short period of time back in 2007, but the quality was absolutely amazing. Then this is another lovely image by Vincent Pardieu, another image by him, but this time in Mozambique, Africa, that is today the largest ruby producer in the world. Rubies have been there. I worked in Mozambique in the late 80s and early 90s, and I remember early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. I was too young on the 80s. I don't look like, but I was. And I remember seeing material from Cabo Delgado, which is the province in the north of the country bordered with Tanzania. And I remember seeing material like this one, and they saying, it's rubbish. It's corundum. It's not facetable quality. All of a sudden, by opening roads and other things, they did find huge, I underline huge, quantities of fine quality rubies in facetable quality, in cabochon quality, also in those qualities that serve for lead glass filling treatment. So it's a ruby land. So Mozambique, not only in Cabo Delgado, particularly in Montepuez, but also in Niassa and Tete, but mostly in Cabo Delgado, the quality of the rubies and the quantity is absolutely amazing. And this is another great picture where you can see the rough, we can see the preforms, and we can see the cut stones. If you want to learn more about Mozambican rubies, I will give you tomorrow at the email, you will receive a link for the GIA YouTube channel, well, where Wim Verk, I don't know, I never know how to pronounce his Belgian name, Wim Vertiest. Sorry, Wim, if you are online, I'm not saying your name properly. But check out his lecture on Mozambican rubies, and the information is really nice, and it's about 1 hour 20 of great information. Make sure you visit the GIA website and check it out, because he will explain all those things and different varieties that you can find in Mozambique. I'm not spending time on that, but he did, and he did a wonderful job. Go and check it out. We might think that in Mozambique and elsewhere we don't find like the prime quality pigeon blood under brackets kind of color that we find traditionally in Burma. but we do. This is a pair of really top quality rubies, and look at the size, 14 carats and 13 carats. This is big, and they were sold on this auction house in Hong Kong for $6 million. I just wonder if those rubies were from Mogok, how much would some consumer pay? Because they are from Mozambique, okay? Mozambique is not for the regular consumer, not the sexiest source for rubies, because they have never heard about it. It has only 10 years old. If it was Burma, woo, maybe they would pay much more. I have no idea. I've heard from Wim that those rubies are about to be auctioned again. I would love to see the results of that auction, but I presume, like he does, that probably this will go much higher this time. Those rubies are absolutely fabulous. And because we are talking about history and rubies, we could not fail in speaking about the oldest rubies on the planet, geologically speaking. And by those of you that like geology, to understand the ruby geology is fascinating. And Vincent Pardieu, he gave another terrific webinar for the Asian, I will show you the images in a couple of minutes, that he explains the geological formation of rubies, in particular those from Greenland. Maybe this is why a certain ruler of a certain country wanted to buy Greenland. We don't know. But this is this is top quality material that you might find in Greenland. And I ask you again, pink sapphire or ruby? Where do you draw the line? Keep that in mind, because it's not easy to make that decision. Most material from Greenland is cabochon quality, is also treated. Flux healing is really common in that material. But Vincent, he explained really well on this webinar that this one you can see on YouTube. You go to AIGS YouTube channel, you look for this logo, and you can listen to that presentation where Vincent, that is going to be our guest on Friday, explains everything about Greenland. By the way, if you want to revisit my Emerald talk, those of you that didn't hear the Emerald talk on Home Gemmology on this platform, you can see that on the AIGS, because I made one for them and they recorded it, and it's there. And also, if you want Friday, not on the time of the Home Gemmology, Warren Boyd from Potent Mining, he will present on Montana fancy sapphires. It will be really interesting. So you have a lot of things to do if you wish. In sum, when we look at the sources of ruby, and I'm sure that I've missed a couple here on this list, you see a lot of it in Asia, Africa, not that much elsewhere, but the two main sources still are Myanmar, which is Burma, and today, of course, Mozambique. But you have lovely material coming from many places. And this is why origin is challenging. And because of origin being so challenging in the laboratory, you need people like Vincent, like Wim. Wim works for the GIA. Vincent, he works for whoever wants his services. He has worked for GIA, for Gublin, for Danat, and also for AIGS. And gemology and laboratories, they need field gemologists like them, so they can collect samples. So by collecting samples, well-documented samples, you can have reliable databases that scientists, the real scientists, solid state physics and chemists and mineralogists, they can retrieve the data from the samples, make databases, so the gemological labs can have enough information to issue opinions on origin. Never call certificates to those documents. They are reports, and regarding origin, they are always an opinion, an informed opinion, an expert opinion, but always an opinion. In conclusion, it's over. So rubies have been sourced for centuries, particularly in Asia and particularly in Myanmar, but other sources are considered like Sri Lanka and Jagdalek in Afghanistan, but those are not as important as Myanmar or Burma for the jewelry trade. And this is really important. They share the same name, or rubies share the same name with Spinel. mostly because of the spinels of Tajikistan, of the Badakhshan area in present-day Tajikistan. And they are really rare, okay? Ruby is quite rare in good quality, good color, good transparency. Transparency is really hard to find, but big sizes, larger than your fingernail, it's treated ruby with glass you can find like this. But real ones, they can be heat treated, but like the size of a nail, oh sorry, it's the wrong finger, like the size of a nail, really difficult to find. And Mozambique, and most of you didn't know it, became the largest producer of ruby recently. We associate ruby with Asia. Not anymore, now it's Africa. And by the way, in Mozambique, they speak Portuguese. And because of history and because of all those origins that ruby can have, people, they ask for origin. They like to know where things come from. And laboratories need to give an answer and need to deliver. And although geologists and scientists, they would love just to mention geology origin, the trade asks for geography, which is tricky, and therefore there are challenges. And if you go to GIA website and retrieve the last issue of Gems and Gemmology, it's absolutely entirely dedicated to origin determination. So if you are curious about this, even if you only read the introduction, the articles are interesting for each gemstone variety, but if you read the introduction of that issue, you will understand how challenging origin determination is scientifically for the laboratories and for science as in general. So if you read that, I think you might not jump into conclusions saying that, well, why do different laboratories? They once said that this, in sapphires, it occurs. This is from Madagascar, and this one is from Sri Lanka. Which one is right? Maybe they are both right. And this is the difficult thing. But anyway, that's another thing. I'm sure that Vincent will cover that on his webinar on Friday. So thank you very much. This is the last slide. This fine necklace took almost 100 years to collect because every ruby is the same color, the same hue, the same sec, everything is the same. And together, and they are tricky cuts. Pier cut is not very common in ruby. Heart shape at all as well. So together, hearts and piers like this took almost 100 years. So then it sold an auction for $10 billion. That's how it is. So thank you very much. And we will make a quiz right now, like those things that I will put it on screen so you can reply to a few questions and we can discuss the questions after. Please make sure you put, there are already 22 questions there for me to answer. Let's see if I can get them all. And because I'm not able to put clickable links on the chat log because of security reasons in Zoom, you will receive tomorrow an email with all those links. The links for the webinar, you may check them in a couple of hours in my social media because they will be there right after I finish. I will post them right away. So that's it. Let me stop sharing my screen so you can see my big face. Okay. So thank you. I'm going to share now the poll. I never know how to pronounce this. Some of you were really kind and explaining how to pronounce, but forget it. So I'm sharing the poll now on your screen. And while you are doing the poll, I'm going to look at some comments and questions and answers. So, oh my God, it's so many. Okay, Q&A. Not that many. It's easier to go into the Q&A while you are doing that. I will try to Oh, the website on books. Website on books. If you go to GIA website on the library, you navigate. Yeah, I'm talking to Prablin Kaur. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Sorry about that. But if you go to the GIA website, go to the library sub site, you have there lists of bibliography on every gemstone, including rubies. So also, if you go to Lotus Gemmology website, lotusgemmology.com, it's from Richard Hughes and Billy Hughes and women. You can find also a lot of resources of bibliography on rubies and also sapphires. And I mean, Dick Hughes is the author of the Bible on rubies and sapphires. There is a book, I don't know if I can, hold on, let me see if I can retrieve the book, but I have so many cables. Maybe I can. I look like Secret Service. This is like the Bible of rubies and sapphires. Richard, if you are seeing this, then you pay for publicity. I'm kidding. So this is quite, and it's good for exercise. So if you don't want to read, you can do some exercise in isolation. It's quite, this is like a treaty on rubies and sapphires. And also, by the way, if you want to read on Mogok, this was edited by Kennedy Ho from the Asian Institute of Gemmological Sciences. And it was scientifically overseen by Professor Emmanuel Fritsch. So all the content here is quite nice. And also by a journalist, sorry, I don't remember his name by heart, Jean-Pierre Rabouin. So it has a lot of authors. It's quite a good resource. And you have more, you have the Ted Tamili's book on Mogok. You have so many. There are many resources, but for bibliography, you find it on the GIA library and also on Lotus Gemmology resources, on references. You have a lot. One more question. How can we distinguish pink rubies and pink sapphires? There is no pink rubies. Pink sapphire is a sapphire that is pink. A ruby, it's a sapphire that is red, because pink and red are the same. So that's why this is so tricky. And depends also on the kind of lighting that you are using. Because if you buy a stone in Bangkok and you buy it on the street or on an office with a window open, you have that kind of southern equatorial light. And then you go to Scotland and you shipped the stone from Bangkok to Scotland. And then when you open the package, because the stone looks ugly, because the light on the northern hemisphere in higher latitude is different. Also, the time of the day makes it a little bit different looking at the stones. So sometimes when you see different colors in different light, not sometimes, you see different colors in different lighting conditions, but there is no pink ruby. Ruby is always red. What is pink is a sapphire. But if you want to do, oh, this is a pink ruby, you are singing a song to whoever you want to sell it to. So pink ruby is just a creative way of saying a pink sapphire, and try to use the word ruby for it, but maybe not ethical. More questions. How do we differentiate ruby and other red color sapphire? Red color sapphire is ruby. Let me make this really clear. There is one mineral that is corundum, okay? That occurs in many colors, from colorless to black. And when it is blue, we call it blue sapphire. When it is yellow, yellow sapphire, green, green sapphire, purple, purple sapphire, and so forth. When it is red, we don't call it red sapphire, we call it ruby. As simple as that. So a red sapphire is something that does not exist because we call it a ruby. In poetry, we can call it a red sapphire, but that's poetry. That's not trade names. Clear? I hope so. Lynn, this was for you. Are the standards of different labs very similar? I mean, I hope so. I have no idea. And there is debate because the labs are businesses, right? And they differentiate themselves by the quality of the services they provide. And some labs, they work together. Some labs, they are together on an harmonization committee that exists between labs, and some are not. So it depends on the lab. But mostly the most relevant labs, I would say that they are pretty close, not only on the masters that they have to compare, but also the criteria they use to the observation, the kind of lighting, the kind of cut that they have on their masters, the orientation, because ruby is pleochroic, so you can have two different colors depending on the orientation. So you have many variables to assess color. So there you go. Not easy, not easy. So we have Antoinette. Wow, Antoinette, as always, you write a lot. So I will try to read Spinel. I'm going to read what Antoinette said because I think it's important. Oh, Antoinette, are you, go on the chat and say yes on the chat so I can see that you are listening to me. Antoinette, say yes. Yeah. Okay. I think you are just over there. No, I don't see you. Anyway, I was about to give you the microphone, but anyway, doesn't matter. I'm going to read what Antoinette said. Most of you know Antoinette Matlin. She's a Bonanno, so she comes from a family of gemmologists, very famous gemmologists. So Antoinette, oh, here is Antoinette. So Antoinette, let me press here on you. Because I'm going to get, have you got microphone, Antoinette? Because I'm going to, I would love people to listen to you. Antoinette. Okay, Antoinette, you've got your, you can now.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Hello, Antoinette.
Hello,
Greetings from Lisbon. I know that you are in the Algarve.
Yes, I'm very near you, but seeing you this morning in this wonderful, another wonderful webinar, I'm just getting used to them because I'm one of those older people who all of this modern stuff is more challenging than the gemstones. But here I am.
Thank you for joining. And you were making a comment, quite long one. So I'm sure that the audience is curious about what you had to say about the red spinels from Tajikistan. And since
yes.
you are a world-renowned expert and author, it's a privilege to listen to you. Thank you very much.
I just want to say, to underscore your point about origin and the premium that Burma brings when attributed to any ruby, and thinking about ancient times when they did not have the gemmological equipment and the collective collaborative sharing of knowledge from lab to lab, etc., and the trade route which went through Tajikistan and then down to Burma and then back up to China, etc., etc. I am very curious and trying to find others who are interested in talking to museum curators of major historical collections with major rubies, because we can also now take a lot of instrumentation that's much more portable than was once the case. I am willing to bet that some of the finest rubies from Tajikistan in ancient times may actually be in museums today identified as Burmese rubies. And I say this because of a particular ring that grabbed my attention several years ago, and it is identified today as a Tajikistan ruby. But every single ruby dealer who has seen this ring for years now, the first words out of their mouths are, "What a gorgeous ruby, Burma, right?" No, Burma, wrong. But it looks like Burma. It has many similar characteristics. It also has a fluorescent characteristic. So it really is red in certain lights, particularly those that simulate its fluorescence. So it would just be, I think, as you have said, the science changes. We used to call Spinel's Balas rubies. The science changes, the instrumentation changes, sources change. So every one of your listeners, based on the gift you have given us in these webinars, the amount to be learned from you and from others sharing is so important. I just want to urge everyone, don't think you finally know the field of gemology. There's no such thing. It is the only constant in the field of gemology is change. And you have to keep up to date. You have to keep studying. Go to the museums and look at these.
We cannot go to museums now, Antoinette.
Well, right. Well, I'm anticipating that this day of being locked at home will pass eventually. Okay. And when it does, the museums are a fabulous source to see magnificent gems. So are the auction houses. You mentioned these various pieces that were sold at auction. If you are in the trade, one of the most wonderful places to see extremely rare things are at the magnificent jewelry sales of the major auction houses in the countries. Absolutely. Get their catalogs, see what's coming up, go look at them, take your tools and examine them yourself to see and learn. But thank you, Rui. I want to point out, particularly on the rubies, I think that we are still to learn things about what is currently in museums identified as Burma, and I hope we find that many are not, because I would like to see people, the public in particular, and jewelers, point out the rarity of the quality of particular rubies rather than the particular country from which they came.
Yeah, that's an important thing.
Yes.
Sometimes people, they don't look at not everybody, but some people, they don't look at the stones, they look at the reports.
Exactly.
So, but that might change. Let's believe that the beauty of gemstones will conquer again the hearts of whoever likes to buy them, and eventually that will happen. Thank you very much, Antoinette, for your contribution. Thank you so much. I know that you are in the Algarve.
Yes.
Great weather, and I don't know if you are stuck in there or if you are planning to be there for a while. So enjoy my country. Bye-bye, Antoinette. Send my love to Stuart. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Antoinette Matlins. You might know her. She was a recognized author on gemological issues. And I'm going to share now the quiz, the poll quiz. More than 500 people voted. Well, it's really good. Not that many abstentions. So let's go one by one, and then I will try to answer a couple of more questions. Then I will have, unfortunately, to go. So ruby as a red corundum is mineralogically related to sapphire, of course, emerald at all, and spinel. It was historically related, not mineralogically, but as a trade name. So in terms of mineralogy, they have nothing in common, but in terms of the use of their trade name, yes, they did have something in common because they shared the same name. So answer, the correct one was sapphire, the first one. So number two, the main difference between pink sapphire and ruby is tone and saturation of color. Yes, because pink and red are the same. It's the same. Technically, it's the same. We call it different things because of our education, right? But it's the same thing. And then what we need to know, and that's not up to us, it's up to the trade, up to the laboratories to know exactly is, where is the border between sapphire and ruby? What are the conditions that he used to make that separation? And what are the master stones, the references that he used to make that comparison? So that's challenging for the labs. And labs that are used to work with rubies, like Gublin, SSCF, AIGS, GIT, GIA, and GGTL, they they must, and they do understand this issue of how to name a stone, corundum, if it is a pink sapphire or ruby, because there is a price thing. You hear ruby, more money. You hear pink sapphire, not so much. And geographically, you have people in Asia, they like the pinks. They don't care much about the pink. That's why maybe there is this name, pink ruby. In the West is different. So it depends geographically where you are presenting your stone, because consumers, they have different preferences. Although some of them are massified, we like the same things everywhere in the world, but sometimes you have differences. And in pinks and reds, you have that kind of difference. So this one was, the first one was true. So number 3, fine rubies are very abundant in large sizes. No, they are really rare. The only rubies that you can possibly see in really large sizes, they are, I mean, technically they are not rubies, they are artificial products. They are corundum filled with lead glass. And then they are abundant, and you can see like 10, 20, 30 carat stones like this. Really cheap, really affordable. $1 a carat, $2 a carat, really, but they are not rubies, okay? They are an artificial assembled stone, a mixture of corundum, red corundum, and glass, not ruby. And of course, in museums and fancy jewelry, you can see top rubies, but those are not abundant. They are really rare. So it was false. Number 4, to refer to the historical Mogok origin of a ruby, the trade uses the following expression: Burmese ruby, not that much. Pigeon's blood ruby, that's a color descriptor that is not, today, it's not understood as exclusive of Burmese rubies. But again, it's a question of criteria. You can, different laboratories or different organizations, they can define what they think is a pigeon's blood, because historically it had some meaning in Burma, but today it has a different meaning, I think. And so the right one was the middle one, classical or classic Burma ruby. Classical because it was referring to the classical sources in Mogok, and not because Mong Hsu Rubies, they are also Burmese. They are from Burma. So, but they are not as desirable and as special to the historical, to their historical heritage as the Mogok ones. That's why in gemological reports, if it is Burma, if it is Mogok in rubies, you see classical Burma. So to make sure it's not a Mong Hsu material. And this is important. 5, last one. Mozambique is presently the largest ruby producer. Yes, it is. Produces huge quantities. It's amazing. And the qualities, you might think, oh, it's like cabochon quality. No, you have cabochon quality. You have qualities for lead glass filling for that artificial product, but also top quality like that pair of pigeon blood colored rubies that we saw that are going to be presented on auction. I would love to know where, but and for how much. But also nice quality rubies are produced in Mozambique. And so, having said that, the poll is done, is over with, and we still have a few minutes. Thank you very much. And I will try to answer a few easy questions. Ba-ba-ba-boom. Oh, the Graf ruby belongs to Dimitri Mavromatis. Exactly. I couldn't, I knew the name, but I couldn't pronounce it, and I didn't want to embarrass the gentleman. Now, with the name in front of me, I could try some pronunciation. Thank you, Marie-Laure. Thank you very much. If I know for how much Graf sold the ruby ring for the customer that we sold in auction for those 8.5 million, I have no idea. But he bought the stone back for 8.5 million, and he sold, I presume for more, which is normal, but I have no idea how much more. And I have no idea where it is. Ferrari red, you are quite right. Why are Ferraris red? Red is the color of passion, okay? Rubies are red, color of passion. Has pretty much to do with rubies. Oh, Penelope makes a very good question. Are treatments of Mong Hsu Rubies accepted legal? Let's make one thing very clear. Of course they are legal. Of course they are accepted, but this is not a question of being accepted or illegal. It's only a question of being disclosed or not disclosed. What you should mention on a ruby is the fact, or on a gemstone at large, is the fact that has any treatment been made to that stone that has modified its original color, original clarity, or has enhanced its stability. That are the questions that you should be asking, and the CIBJO, you will have access to all the rules on how to disclose or not disclose treatments in rubies, for example. We have a lot of treatments in rubies. For instance, flux healing in Mong Hsu Rubies is something that you should disclose. The consumer should know that that stone has been treated with flux. And that's a specific disclosure thing that CIBJO, on the rules that now you have access for free. And you go to CIBJO website, cibjo.org, look for blue books, and you have all the downloads ready for you. You will receive an email tomorrow with all of that. But it's not a question of being legal or not. It's a question of being disclosed, properly disclosed throughout the supply chain down to the consumer. And because the most important thing in our industry, one of the most important things, is to protect consumer confidence. And you can do that through transparency, through being transparent and disclosing whatever the products are, because the consumer must make an informed choice. When he goes and buy a product, he must know exactly what he's paying for. That's the way that he will return back tomorrow and the year after and keeps on spending money on our industry. Otherwise, he will, I mean, now he's not traveling, but he will spend money elsewhere. So being transparent is important, but there is no such thing as an illegal treatment. What it is an fair or unfair communication of the treatment that has been done. There is only one thing that can be legal or not, which are stones that are radioactive, that because of any treatment with a high energy, they became radioactive. That's a legal issue, and depending on the jurisdiction, you have different laws in different countries, but not rubies. I hope I replied to your question, Penelope. James, I saw one of the slides with flux healing. May I know why different flux healing will result in different levels of flux remaining in the rubies? I think you should, you should listen to the presentation of Vim at GIA channel, and also Vincent Pardieu presentation on YouTube on Greenland rubies. They make explanations on that one, and they are the real experts on treatments and on gemology. I'm just a nice guy. Which ruby is better, Mozambique or Burmese? That's a great question, because I love answering to that question, Bijal. There is the best one, in my opinion, are the ones that you like, because with gemstones, you must have a love affair, like in love. And if you like this stone, you should be in love with this stone regardless of the family. And in television and movies, we see, oh, this lady comes from that family, so the father of the boy doesn't like him to date that girl. This is the same. If you love the stone, get it. regardless of the family, regardless of where it is. And in the old days, stones were cherished by their visual looks, color, transparency, sparkle, brilliance, whatever. The retinal impact, the emotional impact was most important. Now it seems that people need a piece of paper to know, oh, you are beautiful, but oh, who are you? Well, who is your daddy and mother? It's not nice to, as human beings, to ask, okay, you are very beautiful, but what is the name of your family? The same with stones. Stones, they don't get offended, but put yourself in the shoes of a Mozambican, Vietnamese, or Tanzanian or Kenyan ruby, and that just because they are not from Burma, nobody wants to date them. I don't know if you get my point. Okay, thank you, Vijay. Very good question. Dominique is asking why pigeon blood term is controversial because it's a color descriptor. And again, you need a standard, and there is no standard whatsoever for a pigeon blood. There is not an international accepted standard for pigeon blood. Each laboratory or each organization has its own definition of pigeon blood, has its own master stones to know, okay, from until here is not pigeon blood, from here I call it pigeon blood. Gobelin has it, SSCF has the same standard as Gobelin, if I'm not mistaken. Lotus Gemmology in Bangkok, they have their standards for color descriptors, but it's their own thing, it's not international. And they may differ in the right place where they put the standard. They might also differ in accepting the term only for Burmese material, or will they accept for Mozambican, Vietnamese, and whoever. And also the conditions, the lighting conditions, the observation conditions that you use to assess the pigeon blood epithet. So there are a lot of variables, and because there is no standard, you can use it as a romantic way of saying pigeon blood. That's it. And sometimes even Ken Scarrett the other day, he brought me to my attention a 1961 newspaper clip from a British UK newspaper of a tribunal dispute between somebody that said the ruby was pigeon blood and somebody that said, oh, what is it, pigeon blood? So it's not new, but it was a very old term that Burmese traders would use in Mogok to describe the best available quality of a ruby. And that's the origin, but then it came into English in the 19th century. So it's controversial because there is no international standard, but it's romantic, it's nice. So I have, 11:30. I have time for one more question. I'm going to choose the easiest one. Let me see. Oh, I have 63 questions. There are here things that I don't know how to reply, so I'm not even going to put myself in the position of saying I don't know, but that's true. Yeah. Are there rubies not colored by chromium? Yes, vanadium, but that's really rare. And let me show you the example. It's right here. It came really handy. Let me see if I can see what it is. This is really a fantastic book. I hope I can look. Vanadium. Okay. Good question. And with that question, I end this webinar. I really have to go. Thank you very much. Be safe, stay at home. And until this emergency is on, I will be here every Tuesday and Friday, try to entertain you as much as I can and possibly If you learn something, even better. Okay. Bye bye. Keep safe. Good to be with you.